And then I've broken our first rule, which is this is a meeting that is taped. And so we remind all of our XCAP members that you need to hit the button. And also those of you who wish to speak, I will be taking public comments a couple of times during the agenda. And we'll ask that you go and just line up at the podium over there and introduce yourselves, and then we'll take your comments. So my name is Eileen Goodwin. My role, as you might guess, is meeting facilitator, and this meeting is scheduled to go till 6 o'clock, and after we do introductions, I'll run through the agenda. Ed?
Good afternoon. Ed Shikata, City Manager, Palo Alto.
Hey, I'm Greg Braille. I'm from the Duvernay St. Francis neighborhood.
Hi, Nadia Nayak from Old Palo Alto neighborhood and CARD.
Barbara Best from the Palo Alto Unified School District.
Chantel Cotton Gaines, City Manager's Office, City of Palo Alto.
Larry Klein, Leland Manor neighborhood.
Phil Burton, Midtown South.
Tony Carrasco, Architect.
In-Young Cho, Southgate neighborhood.
Philip Kemi, Chief Transportation Official, City of Palo Alto.
Peter DiStefano, Civil Engineer with AECOM.
John Mayer, Rail Engineer, AECOM.
Elliot Wong, Rail Engineer, AECOM.
Eddie Mercurio with AECOM Project Manager.
Malette Litzinger, AECOM Deputy Project Manager.
In the front row there on the right, if you choose to introduce yourself in the neighborhood or group that you might represent.
Peter Coughlin, Southgate.
Rachel Croft, Southgate.
Jim Lightbody, representing Caltrade.
Carrie Templeton, Planning and Transportation Commission.
Susan Newman, Southgate.
Rob Levitsky, Embarcadero, Emerson.
Libby Arkin, Churchill.
Steve Carlson, Southgate.
Drew Mitton, Sutherland. Stuart Hanson, Duvernay.
Jeff Brown, Churchill, North Palo Alto.
Gary Lindgren, near Edison School.
Great, welcome. I see many. Oh, Megan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I also live near Addison.
Great, welcome. Well, thank you again for being here, and thanks to our community folks, and thanks to those of you who represent official entities and agencies. Today we have an agenda that includes community conversations. This is our tradition of going around with the XCAP members and having them report out if there's anything that they have done as far as community presentations or just gossip at the Safeway in between the last meeting we had a couple weeks ago and today that they wanted to share with the group. Then we'll go through, the city manager will give a report. Last time, I think you're all aware that there was a city council consideration of a blue ribbon committee, and he's got an update on that. And then the next two items will be taken together, and basically we're going to have the outline of the workshop. Etty will go through that, and then Chantel will be handing out some of the questions we've gotten from the XCAP members regarding that, and we'll take those two items together today. So the design workshop on your written agenda looks like number 7, but I am going to collapse it in with number 4 because to me I think they kind of go together, and it'll be easier for the community to follow along if we explain what the workshop's outline is, and then we talk about the topics that the XCAP has put forward. Then we'll go into some renderings from Embarcadero Alma. We'll talk about the Churchill Viaduct, and those presentations will be given by the AECOM engineers who just introduced themselves. And then we'll do a summary of action items and adjourn. Right now, I'm thinking that we'll take a couple of times for public comment, maybe quickly after the city manager's report, then after we do our 2 items about the design workshop, and then again after we do the AECOM engineering presentations. So we do manage to adjourn today around 6, but thankfully, and I'm sure our member Larry will be happy to hear, we do not have the hard stop at 6 today, although I know many of you do like to count on a pretty predictable ending, but we're not going to be quite as rushed as our last meeting, so we're looking forward to having a little bit more air. So with that, does anybody have any questions about the agenda or what's going to happen today? All righty. So community conversations, I'm going to start with Greg, and we'll just go around. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is a new addition. It's kind of like we have been showing work plans in the past, which look more like calendars. And we're trying this new approach, which allows us to put some public meetings out there all on one page. And so as you can see here, our next group meeting for XCAP meeting number 5 is in another couple of weeks. We've really pulled the schedule to meet a lot more frequently. And so our next one will be another one in September rather than before we were meeting monthly. We also have the design workshop that I've been referencing. That's on the Friday after our next Wednesday XCAP meeting. Then we meet again in mid-October, then the end of October, and then we have a community meeting in early November. And Adina has joined us. So Adina, would you click the button and introduce who you are and who you're with?
Adina Levin with Friends of Caltrain, keeping an eye out on this and other grade separation projects on the corridor.
Thank you. Welcome. So with that, let's go ahead and maybe I'll start with Greg and then jump back to Adina since she's still just getting ready.
Just a quick illustrative conversation I had at church, actually. I saw a poster for a meeting that Nadia doesn't know she's presenting at. And someone said, "Oh, what's that about?" And I said, "Oh, it's about the plans that we have in the town to separate Caltrain from the road." And he said, "Oh, I thought we didn't have to do that because high-speed rail wasn't coming." So to me, that was indicative of, I think, where many people in town are.
Okay. All righty, Nadia, update?
So I think I'll take 5 conversations and merge them into one. I've been getting a lot of questions, which I'm sure we'll get some answers on once the City Council has their meeting, about the difference between the RBRIC and the XCAP and kind of what's happening there. I did have one question, which I'm hoping to get an answer to, which was, I was trying to explain that, well, we're supposed to come up with a consensus recommendation, but we don't make decisions, but then the RBRIC, I'm not sure what they'll do. And so the question was, how do you come to consensus recommendation if you're not taking positions or voting as a group except until the very end, which I thought was a pretty good question. So I'll throw that out there.
And so that was related to the Blue Ribbon Group, though?
Well, no, to the XCAP. In other words, where the resident was asking, where am I supposed to follow? Do I devote my time to come to these meetings? Am I supposed to follow the RBRIC? Is it the City Council I'm supposed to bother? And I was trying to, I do a lot of gesticulating, but I didn't have an answer for that one, so.
Well, maybe we could have the city manager as part of his update and the next item kind of go into that in a little bit more depth. I'm going to jump back to Adina in case you have had any kind of community conversation specifically about Palo Alto since our last meeting a couple weeks ago, and it's okay to say pass. And if you do, we need you to press the button.
Yeah. So the relevant conversations have been more at the regional level in watching for example, the Caltrain board this morning talk about the governance issues that are raised by their business plan and their service vision proposal to increase ridership by 3 to 4 times, which entails a major grade separation program. And one of the potential ways of addressing that is potentially having a grade separation authority that could have a larger scope in terms of helping to fund and deliver these projects. There is going to be a board workshop in November that is going to just be the start of the conversation about what organizational changes may be thought about for Caltrain to be able to achieve its service vision goals. So that is a thing that is happening, and a related thing is happening at the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, where they are talking about a construction authority starting with the downtown extension project to connect Caltrain to the Transbay terminal, also talking about regional construction issues. And these are things going on in the background that could potentially help with being able to get some of these things built.
Thank you. All right, Barbara.
Yeah, no update from the PAUSD. I update board members and such, and we're all really interested in where this is going.
And you're back to school, right?
Oh my gosh, don't get me started.
So we all need to be driving safely, biking safely.
Please. Yes.
All right, Megan.
I did get some feedback from the Emerson folks that they are glad that Emerson and sort of the issues of the different loops at High and Emerson and so forth are being taken into account in the new Embarcadero options that we have on the table. I think there's still lack clarity on whether more data is needed in order to do a proper analysis to support those options, or whether we sort of have our data and the need for mitigations to those 2 streets has been proven out and we're good. So I think that clarity on that would help them a lot.
Is that part of today? Can we have anything on that? No, but we'll take a note and try and get back to you. Larry?
Pass.
Okay. Phil?
I was planning to send out last week an email to my various groups about the next few events, but then I thought I should just wait till today for more detail. So with that detail, I'll send out these emails tomorrow. I do want to mention a sort of kind of community thing. I got quoted, without knowing it in advance, in an article in today's Palo Alto Online about the Arbic issue. I wasn't asked for the quote, it just happened.
So you're probably in good company. You're in good company with that.
I'm not disavowing it, please. But fortunately, I was quoted properly, but it was a complete surprise.
Okay, let the record show. Thank you, Phil. Tony?
So my conversations have sort of revolved around how fast we're going. And this community has done really great things. Look at the foothills that Larry here has preserved. Look at the Baylands. We had and did it slowly, incrementally, with lots of buy-in. And my view is that I think we should have that kind of inclusive discussion process. Too fast because I think last time we spent maybe 30 seconds on each option, and you can't really look at it, make a judgment, comment on it, and then there's no discussion on it. If you can be more inclusive, I think we'll come to a better place. I was in Chicago, walked down Riverwalk.
Mm-hmm.
It's magnificent. It's beautiful. I mean, we can do beautiful things. The foothills, the Baylands, stunningly beautiful. We should do that same thing here. Take the time to do it really well, please.
Great. Imya?
I think there are a lot of discussion about Churchill. So their last XCAP meeting, Steve Carson presented the closure of Churchill is concerning. You know, some of the Southgate folks wants the church to be open, and another part of the Southgate also kind of surprised by this survey result, and they recollected the data and asked me to get some more signature. But we did had data collected 2 years ago by NOPA, so there are 458 or something like this people signed regarding closure, supporting closure of Churchill. So I asked NOPA people to reiterate this thing, so I think you all got an email about the analysis as well as the signature and stuff. So I think that's what we're going to discuss today, so I'm really excited about it.
Good, good. All right. Thank you very much. Our next item is the city manager with the status of the city council considerations.
Well, and thank you, Phil, for pointing out the article because I hadn't seen it, so I'm reading it as we were sitting here. Good to see what I had done. So my goodness, well, everyone's
Were you quoted also?
Apparently so, but I'm sure it's accurate. So just a quick update. Obviously, everyone knows again that the council will be taking up the topic of the RBRIC, this Rail Blue Ribbon, now referring to as commission. Again, a little stronger reference to the former or the prior Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission that was done many years ago. So we'll see where the council wants to go with it. I will note that, again, not having read the article, I'm sure it was already described, is what we've got in front of the council for next week, a refined concept for them to discuss. And to Nadia's point, try to draw a little stronger distinction between the role of the XCAP and the RBRIC. And again, once again, this is simply food for thought for the council because ultimately they need to decide where to head with it. The distinction would be to try to talk about what we are doing in three fairly distinct, not linear, but certainly somewhat distinct phases. First phase being understanding the options. And since I really haven't said this adequately, let me just point out that the XCAP and the CAP has been extraordinarily valuable in helping us both understand the options, ensure that the engineering work is presented in ways that are understandable from a layperson's perspective, that the material is digestible and, again, understandable, but also to refine the concepts that have been brought forward in ways to ensure that they do reflect concerns as well as interests from neighborhood perspective as well as beyond. So it would really be to focus in that understanding of the options that the XCAP's work would primarily focus. Then the second phase of community conversations, and we've had some of that here, whether it be petitions or concerns raised with any of the options that are being brought forward, that will be, I think, ultimately, as Tony pointed out, some of the interaction that really is part of the Palo Alto culture, to be able to do some give and take and understanding, and in some ways the maybe some compromises that are discussed along the way. Then finally, the third phase being the decision-making phase, and how the council's decisions on the preferred alternatives for each one of the locations that we're talking about also fit in with a funding strategy and some of the regional issues that Adina has pointed out. So again, to try to draw that distinction in terms of the phases of discussion, to the extent that it's helpful for the council to consider where they need and want expanded community panel input along the way. So that will be the council's discussion on Monday. I do want to tie to a couple other things that are upcoming because they're relevant both to the discussion that will happen Monday as well as things that we've been talking about here. And it's in anticipation of the following week's city council meeting. So on September 16th, we will have a couple of items that relate. One that folks are probably aware of if you've been tracking the business tax discussion, that will come back to the city council. It has been in the finance committee most recently. So there's a report out of the progress made at the finance committee for the full city council's discussion, again, that will happen on September 16th. The elements of that include transportation as well as potential other uses, as well as some of the format of business-related tax. Again, that the council will have the opportunity to confirm that the finance committee discussion is something that the entire council agrees with. And then the other piece that you will see on the September 16th agenda is referencing back to Adina's point on Caltrain. Come back, staff will be presenting potential comments for the city council to make on the Caltrain business plan and its long-range service vision. So as had been noted, both the frequency of trains as a part of Caltrain's long-range business plan, and again, what they're calling the long-range service vision, the role of grade separations in that long-range service vision, and also the expectation and the role of 4-track sections as a part of that as well. So we'll bring that forward to the council to gauge their interest in making some comments, since Caltrain, and Adina may have further info based on this morning, is planning to bring that forward to the October Caltrain board meeting for a potential adoption of that long-range service vision, then leading into further discussion of their organizational decision-making as to how to proceed with next steps on grade separations as well as other things. One of the issues that we do flag in the report is the role that Caltrain could play in the implementation of grade separations, recognizing that, as we've reported previously, VTA has told us that bonding for grade separations is not something that they are looking to do at this point, given that they expect their bonding capacity largely to be used for BART. So we're asking the council whether they would like us to engage Caltrain in a discussion as to whether they would be interested in participating in the financing discussions for grade separation projects. That would certainly be in the city's interest, not only for Palo Alto, but I suspect for Mountain View and Sunnyvale as well, rather than have cities try to take on multi-$100 million obligations for bonding. So that's a topic, again, that will be coming on the 16th.
Okay, questions for the city manager, Nadia. And I do want to recognize Judy Kleinberg's here from the chamber. Thank you. Welcome. No problem. Yeah, we.
So the news about VTA saying that they will not be using their bonding capacity for Caltrain is a big deal. That actually seems like the council may want to write a letter to VTA about that issue, because number one, that there should be some sort of formal announcement announcing that, and I don't know if VTA has done that or not. But either way, if they've communicated to staff, if we could agendize this so that they have the flexibility when thinking about Caltrain organizational stuff and making comments, they can comment to both VTA, you know, trying to save you some time to not have to bring that back, so that they can have the concept, the idea of, okay, who are we going to yell at about what's happening in which way.
Appreciate that. I think the report's already put out, or actually it'll, I think, be out publicly later today, or if not, first thing. So we've set the agenda the way it's structured. That we did have a discussion of VTA related to the grand jury report, and these same issues were discussed there, you know, in terms of governance, in terms of concerns about the potential use of funds going forward, and Measure B obligations to the voters, and how that might be something to keep an eye on going forward.
Okay, Adina, and then I see Larry and Tony.
On that topic, you know, I hearing that there's information and the staff report coming out, that'll be looking forward to reading as soon as it is posted online. But in relation to what Nadia said, what I hope would be a local framing of this is not so much, you know, beating up VTA as much as realizing that it shouldn't really be up to any one county or another to be in charge of whether a regional system is successful or not. And this is something that is, there needs to be a different scope to manage this regional project that affects, you know, doesn't just affect one county, and looking positively for solutions that, you know, support this regional goal is probably a positive way of saying that, as opposed to the, like, why are you being terrible? That would be a thought about, there's a set of things that our region is missing in order to be able to manage regional projects, and it could probably be put in those terms.
Great. Thanks, Adina. Larry and then Tony.
Following up on Adina's remarks. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
Both aspects of Adina's remarks, how important this is, and being polite about being terrible. Well, let me be non-polite about being terrible. Have we considered taking legal action against VTA on this?
Mm-hmm. Either take legal action or pry it out of our hands.
And shouldn't we? Because I don't know if we're ever going to succeed in getting VTA off the BART overall attitude they've had for years, and paying attention to the North County if we don't really show that we're going to be tough.
Perhaps at this point, I'll just say that we're certainly going to keep all options on the table going forward.
Okay, Tony.
So I forgot to mention that, firstly, let me comment on this RBRIC and XCAP. If RBRIC is looking at costs and we are devoid of costs, we're going to choose alternatives that are not compatible with RBRIC. So this is the third time I'm going to ask that we have costs embedded in the alternatives, or at least some way for us to decide if we choose a certain option, what does it cost, and sort of have an idea of how much we can afford. For instance, looking at the Meadow Charleston tunnel, and if it costs $1.5 billion, which it probably does in that range, we can't look at it. So we need to mesh costs and.
So we will have that holistic conversation at our meeting at the end of the month. So the 25th of September, the team will have costs on all of the options that are still on the table, as well as a matrix. And so we'll have that as an agenda item so you can sort of shuffle through all of it with the costs attached. So when you see the things you're seeing today, they don't have firm numbers yet, but they will in a couple of weeks. And we'll put that on the agenda. You'll have it in front of you as a matrix. So all the projects will be laid out with costs.
Is it a total cost, or is it incremental that we can choose? Pick and choose?
Millette.
Yeah, total construction cost, and we have already presented all the costs for the previous
Yeah.
alternatives.
I've
So those are all available. So the new things that you've been seeing since the ETSCAP are not costed, but they will be by our next meeting.
So I'm not asking about total cost. I'm in a design workshop, you need incremental costs. In other words, per foot or per some measurement that gives us some ability to decide whether these alternatives are feasible or not feasible from our point of view.
So that request was at a previous CAB meeting, and those are in the meeting notes where we did add the per length for each, or per, was it per foot or per mile? Per mile for each of the Meadow Charleston alternatives that have been costed out.
Are they on the website?
Yep, they are.
Nadia.
So I just got clarification from Chantal before. So apparently they were posted on the old website that does not link to the new website. So if you go to pagradesep.com, I think, is where those meeting notes are. But yeah, the rest of us were looking at the new website, which we were told to promote, which is the connectingpaloalto.com. And so it's not there.
Okay, Chantel, can you take the mic and tell us when that will be live? Because that's a city thing.
So we're clarifying with the AECOM team this week. We're going to set a go live date probably within the next week, but we want to make sure that we've migrated all the content over and have added the upcoming meetings just to make sure that everything's on the new website.
Okay, so I'm going to put that as an action item. And in the meantime, please go to the original website. That all the materials are there, all the meeting summaries, et cetera. So we have that. Anybody else before I go to the public? I do want to recognize that Keith Reckdahl is here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Anybody have any other comments or questions for Ed under the arbrick? I just heard that for the first time. That's Yeah, I love Nadia. She created a word out of it. That was good. It's like hard. It's like, it's a whole new language. I was reading in the weekend that emojis are now a new language. So, yeah. Okay. Anybody else before I go to the public? Is anybody from the public want to comment on this topic? Yes. Keith, did you want to talk? And then if you would come up, because I need you to be at the microphone. So you'll be after our CAP member finishes. Oh, well then, can you wait on the other topic then? Yeah. Okay.
We're talking about pricing, and I may have missed this since I came in late. I know it's hard to price these things at preliminary state, but also some of the inputs are not done yet, in the sense that the grade, allowable grade, is a huge driver for costs for these various. And we need a hard number of what we can have and what we can't. And if that number is not chosen carefully, we will throw out possibilities that may be real. So that's one thing I really want to know is we need to firm up all the inputs before we can do any pricing.
Anybody want to address the timing for that? Ati, you've always been our Caltrain, grade SEP, what's it called? Design exceptions, et cetera. You want to give us an update on that?
So far, the alternatives that we've developed so far to date, some of them are requiring design exceptions. And for the Charleston Meadow, which we've developed so far to date, we've submitted a request to Caltrain on what, would these be as acceptable, and if, what would be the process. And we are expecting a response from them shortly, but we have not received it as yet.
Okay. And does our Caltrain rep have any update on timing? I see none. Okay. It's in process. All right. We'll try and get an update for our meeting next time. All right. Is there anyone who does want to make a public comment directly related to this topic of the arbrick that will be coming up again that the city manager just mentioned? Okay. We're going to go ahead and move on. As I mentioned, for those of you who were here at the beginning of the meeting, I have combined or moved up item 7 on the written agenda to become the new number 4, and we'll take number 7 and number 4 original number 4 together. We're going to ask Etty to outline the design workshop. This was that meeting that I mentioned is on a Friday at the end of the month, the 27th. And she'll go through that outline. And then Chantel has been collecting from the XCAP members who have chosen to participate some questions you want to make sure that the design team covered. So we were going to pass those out and have a bit of a discussion about that after we set the table with how the meeting will go. So with that, Etty.
So this is going to be, as Eileen mentioned, it's going to be on a Friday. It's going to be from 10 to 2, right there, right on the right side of the slide there. And this is just a basic overview. And again, we're looking for input on this, but we're going to go over the overview of the goals for the grade separation, kind of do a high-level project overview. Go through some of the engineering basics, because we've heard a lot of questions on, what's, the profile, vertical curves, horizontal curves, clearances, and some of the things that drive our how the alternatives are put together from an engineering aspect. We'll do an alternative overview of what we've looked at, what has been looked at to date, and then we're going to have breakout tables to basically do deep dives into those alternatives of the alternatives that are out there. Churchill, which is the closure viaduct. Charleston Meadow, we have looked at trench, hybrid, and viaduct. South Tunnel, which is something that we're working on now, which is with and without freight. And then also have a table there for alternatives that are no longer being considered, as well as talk about what the implications are if you do a no-build. And then from there, we'll have a report out. And again, we're working through like the timing of how we'll do this, break out the time from, 10 to 2 on these breakouts, and then, adjourn for that. But this is really to kind of, and again, these questions that we've received so far to date, which is the handout going around, is really to kind of understand, to help us understand what you don't understand about the alternatives, and then also to hopefully, you get an understanding of why the shoe fly is on the left side, on the east side versus the west side, some of those kinds of questions that have come up. So with that.
And if you would mention where, if somebody has a new idea, that would probably be best in the breakout tables to kind of brainstorm and kind of be a little markery on maps and things like that?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then before I turn it over to the questions that you might have, last time when we were here, there was some question about who's participating in this, and I'm going to ask the city manager to update us on the current thinking.
It was really to reinforce the purpose of the workshop being to allow the XCAP to do deep dive. So I think we'll still work through the what's the right word? It's a disclaimer perhaps up front for folks who may be walking into the conversation for the first time, to basically say this is not for the uninitiated. This will be, in all likelihood, a pretty technical discussion that you all will have asked for, and I think appropriately so, will be able to engage in as much detail as you'd like to do. So again,
And the council members will be attending? Is that still true?
It will be open to council members. I've asked for an indication of how many will be there. If we did have a quorum, we'd need to do Brown Act noticing and the like. At this point, there's no indication that it will be a quorum, but given that, we'll just be prepared either way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you want to go through some of these buckets, Chantel, since you've been the one collecting these before I turn it to questions about all of this? Because it looks like I see a lot of questions from Nadia and city staff, and looks like several of you have gotten your questions in. Gold star for you. So anything jumping out to you, Chantel, because you put this together, presumably you've read it all.
I'll just give a little orientation because it's a giant spreadsheet, and I'm sure that's intimidating. We had a link for the XCAP members to submit questions and just anything you have about the Meadow Charleston crossing, as well as Churchill, and then sort of general, I believe, was the other one. And yeah, just general information. And so what we did is just exported all the information that we received. So we'll clean this up a little bit as well in terms of making sure redundant questions are taken out. But the idea is asking people what are the questions that you have about the alternatives on the table. So I believe we had about 4 XCAP members that filled it out. And then city staff also took a shot with the AECOM team at trying to write down some of the questions that we've heard from you over time. And so that's what that giant bucket of questions is as well.
Great. And also, as I recall at our last meeting, there were people who offered previous workshops and links and things, and I know Tony and Phil had resources. Those have been sent out. They are on the website, the links to that. So with that, I see Nadia's hand is up. I see Larry's hand and Imjon's hand. Go ahead.
The format of, I noticed that we changed from workshop from charrette.
That was direction from the group last time.
Yeah, well, the question remains, I mean, so I think what it seems like we're going to be going through is super helpful, but in many ways, it's sort of what the community meetings already were. It's just that the XCAP will get a deeper dive. Is that accurate?
Well, and I think there's some opportunity to do some brainstorming and drawing that we don't typically do at a community meeting during the breakouts.
Okay, because I'm reading the council's motion, and it literally said, allow the working group to brainstorm some alternatives such as Embarcadero, Meadow, and Charleston. But the way this is set up, you basically go to a table, and maybe you can rotate. But how is all of the XCAP allowed to participate at the same time? We'd have to go like all of us at Churchill, then move all of us to Meadow, then move all of us to Charleston, and that seems like it would probably take more time than we probably have allotted, and that's kind of the only way for all of us to get creative and really be able to understand from each other what's happening. And so, I mean, I would like to recommend that be a better format where we all of us sit at the same table and be able to work on it in that way, because otherwise, if we all just split up to our favorite grade step, it's going to be hard to have a conversation, and I don't think we're going to be able to learn from each other's questions and try to have a chance to be able to get creative.
Right, and we agree with that. Part of our challenge right now, and one of the reasons why I had the city manager, try and explain who's invited, is that's harder to do. It's easy to do if it's us, right? And our group who are our loyal followers. It's much harder if there's 200 people in the room to do this one table at a time and let people participate and add things. So we're at a little disadvantage in that we don't know who's coming to our wedding. And that's a little tricky to know how many hors d'oeuvres to order. So we are hoping and thinking that it makes exactly what we observed the same thing you did. It would be a more fruitful conversation, have everybody hear everything and brainstorm and draw and kind of get into it all at the same time, or maybe there's a couple of tables who are doing the same thing going through it. I mean, we don't know yet. We're still working. So feedback like this is exactly what we're trying to get today. How you think it would best work, and importantly, what you think is an absolute non-starter, so we can be thinking about that as we mush on this some more.
So I still think you're missing alternatives that we have requested to specifically isolate, which is, for example, the roundabout concept. I don't see that listed, and that was something that we requested that we look at the last time. And then specifically, I mean, if you guys still don't know who's coming to the wedding and the city's the one paying for this wedding, then it seems to me the city council needs to tell you who's invited because they're doing the guest list. And so if we don't have clarity yet, I don't see why we have to rush to a meeting on the 27th, considering we're even talking about setting up an RBRIC, which means we all sort of acknowledge that this is going to take a little longer. I don't know why we're rushing to do this if we don't even know what the format's going to be. And I think if we don't even have clarity, is the XCAP going to be able to make decisions or at least make recommendations? How will we do that if we're not allowed to vote? How are we supposed to take positions? Let's say we all go to these tables and we come up to Churchill and we find some new alternative. If we can't speak with one voice, how are we supposed to elect that? So this idea of anybody, whether it's the city manager or you, Eileen, having to be like, oh, well, the general mood of the XCAP was this, and so we made this decision. I don't think that's going to fly, and I don't feel comfortable having somebody else represent our opinions, and I'm just uncomfortable with the way this is set up.
Phil?
Yeah, I'm still, maybe I'm being thick-headed, but I still don't have a sense of how much this is a one-way conversation and how much it's a two-way interaction where at least half, maybe the majority of time, is community members speaking to us and getting their ideas, their feedback, even if it's stuff we've heard already. I don't have that sense. I was hoping to get that sense when I put on my email tonight. I can say that. Right now, I don't know what to say.
So I'm going to ask Etty and Ed to take that question, if there's some sense of how that would work and what the thinking is.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that, based on what Nadia said, I'm not even sure I should put out an email tonight.
So I'll weigh in, at least with my perspective on it, that I actually don't think that we want to invite community members to bring new ideas to this workshop. I think it's really more an opportunity for the XCAP to weigh in on what you've seen and concerns you might have with how to change the alternatives that we've already been discussing.
How productive is that going to be? I mean, I don't mean to, again, I'm not trying to be obstructionist, but I'd like to know what value, I'm frankly feeding on what Nadia said is, where's the value of that above and beyond what we're already doing here? Because I think these meetings are very productive, but more of the same?
So I think let me use, if I could
Yeah.
use this, maybe some of the questions that we haven't been able to get into that would be on the table, basically, for discussion. And I would take what Nadia just described. I don't know if it's on the list here, but one of the questions will be, how much money would be saved in 2% versus 1% on a trench? Just use that as an example. And so I think we may not be ready today to answer that question, but then getting the team prepared to have that conversation at the workshop, that would be part of it. And I suspect you will be disappointed at the answer, that there will not be as much of a savings by going to 2% and versus 1 as maybe assumed. And so having the team have an opportunity to explain why that might be the case and the components of costs. So that's one. Another I've heard is, where should the viaduct be located? On the existing rail line versus where the trees are between Alma and the existing rail. And so have the team be able to walk through, here are the considerations, have the XCAP feedback and say, well, I don't buy it, or as the case may be, but again, to have that two-way discussion. And then the last piece, just real quickly, and I think the piece that we really haven't really fleshed out, but maybe the most kind of wide-ranging discussion, is on the traffic. And so, you know, we have had Gary here talking about a new concept at the last meeting, but then to get feedback on that concept, alternatives that XCAP members would like evaluated, including the roundabout, and how to evaluate and again have some direction on where those are headed.
So what is, again, what reason can I give people to come to this workshop?
I would not invite people who are not already in this room.
So then maybe I shouldn't be putting out an email.
So here's the,
I mean,
I'll say the
yeah.
a contradiction, right? And let me just be upfront about that. We have to have an open meeting. We're not going to exclude the public from participating in the meeting. At the same time, you know, with the discussion we've been having here, it'll be really technical and really hard for someone who hasn't been part of these conversations to be able to walk in and feel like they're getting anything out of it, as well as, you know, whether they even are able to walk out feeling like they learned anything. I think this is going to be a very, you know, sort of inside baseball, lack of better metaphor, discussion. You have to know what we're talking about in order to engage in a conversation.
I'm glad I did put that email out a few days ago.
Good.
And again, I'm open to having the team say, no, that, you know, we can approach it in a more open-ended way, or for the XCAP to say you'd rather do it a different way.
So just to summarize, then I'll shut up. That really puts the burden for the public engagement on the November 7th community meeting.
As a next step in the community
And
engagement.
I want to tell people about that meeting to get something out. Okay, all right.
Okay, I promised Adina, and then I see both Megan and Larry have their hands up. I think Im Young wants to go. There's several of you who want to speak. I think Greg. So let's keep going.
Okay, so one thing that I do not yet understand about the scope based on the breakout tables is that in terms of the level of maturity and fleshed outedness, which is not an English word, but we'll go with it, is the traffic and roadway alternatives that were presented last time with roundabouts and other ways of handling the roadway intersection, and and that's at a different level of some of these things. Like some of the ideas on here in terms of Charleston Meadow Trench or hybrid or viaduct, there's been a lot of presentation of that. There's a lot of existing information, and then a lot of detailed questions about trade-offs and designs and options and 2% and whatnot. The roadway is at a much less mature, earlier stage, more charrette-like stage of figuring out like what even that is. I don't see that on there. Is that on here somewhere in between the lines that I cannot see, or like where is that?
Yeah, so we just called it Churchill.
Closure in particular.
Yeah, so we'll make clarity, but that's kind of the roundabout is part of the Churchill discussion on solutions for Churchill.
Okay, it would be helpful to be very slightly more explicit about that.
Okay.
Yep, we definitely can be. Okay, Larry, and then Megan, and then we'll come back around. I have Im Young, and then Greg.
Eileen threw in her presentation at the start of this discussion the idea of new proposals. And Ed has sort of modified that by saying that new proposals from the general public probably are not welcome. Fair? Is that fair? Or,
As it relates to the grade separation options, I think that is accurate.
Good.
You know, again, trench versus hybrid versus viaduct.
No,
The
yes.
traffic piece, I think, is a different situation.
Okay, fair enough. But even if we say that, then what are we saying about new ideas put forth by members of the XCAP? My concern is that at some point, you've got to say, we only have these number of alternatives and we've got to make a decision. And when is that time? It doesn't necessarily have to be right now, but if we just have a new idea thrown in at this meeting, September 27, what are we going to do with it? How much resources are we going to put into evaluating it? If we're not going to evaluate it, then we're misleading people. I think we have to set up what are our ground rules, and there just has to be at some point where we say, this is it. And city councils, I think, are forever facing that idea. Some citizen, whatever the issue is, some citizen comes down at the last moment and says, oh, you guys, the word dumb is implicit in that statement, really haven't gotten the message. You ought to be considering X, Y, or Z. And I just want to sort of preclude that as much as possible by saying at some point we have to say no new ideas are welcome. But as of right now, I think we could certainly say yes, but let's get them out there so we can really consider whether they're worth expending public funds to study them.
And again, some of the ideas that might seem new to some of you may have already been discussed and are under alternatives no longer considered, because this effort started with, help me Nadia, I don't know, 30 or 40 alternatives. So some people who may come in and say, well, why didn't you look at X, Y, or Z, will come to find out, because the engineers have done that work, that was screened out for some real engineering reasons. So there's going to be a little bit of back and forth and nuance with that, but I agree with you. This is kind of like the last hurrah, I think, of getting some new concepts or variations on some concepts, because at some point the council needs to make some decisions here, because money is going to be allocated to others, and you know, as Ed has
I
said.
think that's a very good answer, but it makes me think that under the idea of alternatives no longer considered, it would be helpful if we had a handout.
And we do have that on the website.
Well,
but we can make it available and I'll write it down. We can make it available there.
I think having
Yeah.
alternatives no longer considered a table. Sorry.
No, we do, and that is absolutely one of the options, and that's why it's one of the bullets. Same with no build.
yeah.
What happens if we all decide to just do nothing, let the gates come down, and people still need to understand those cues? I mean, there's definite impacts of doing nothing that we could possibly revisit.
no, I think it would be really useful to have that
Yeah.
explicit so that people can
Right.
see that this idea that they think is a new one has actually been considered in depth.
Yep. Megan, and then Greg? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm young. I've got you
I had
on
a
the
couple
thing.
of questions. No build is its own table. What exactly is there to discuss?
Well, again, it's a lot of traffic issues related to that.
Okay, so is it about like what happens if we don't build, or how do we message not like building because the issues with no building? Like what's the okay? But that
Etty
kind
and
of also
Millette,
goes
do you
to
want
the
to take
general
that?
goal of what the output of the whole process should be.
Well, the no build is, again, if you do nothing, we'd want to go through what that means. And in no build, it's really about the traffic and the queues, and the increased number of trains that we now know that Caltrain is going to have. So we want to just make sure that we, as in this conversation, as we talk about alternatives, we also talk about what the consequences, if you do nothing, because that has come up in the community meetings as well.
Okay, so answering questions about that.
But do we have updated traffic? I mean, one of the things that XCAP and CAP has asked, well, I don't know about XCAP, but CAP certainly asked multiple times, was for an update on what it would look like if you don't separate and you have lots of trains. And there's a reference to an old Josh Mello presentation that had queuing, and I don't know whatever happened, but that never has come back.
So our new traffic consultant is looking at the queues as part of their new scope.
Yeah, and that will be presented at the next CAP.
So you'll get that on the 25th before the 27th. So
Will
we'll
the
have
tra-
some time to go through that before the meeting on the 27th.
Will the traffic folks be at this meeting on the 27th?
They'll be at both the 25th and the 27th.
And will anyone from Caltrain be at the meeting on the 27th?
I'm
Or
sure
will the
somebody will
response
cover it for
from
Caltrain. I'm looking at Jim.
Melissa should be attending
Okay.
the next two meetings.
Okay. You'll be out of town. Okay. Lucky you. All right. Anything else? I know you said you had a couple items, Megan. And then I do have, again, Greg. I've got Im
Yes,
Young,
my
a couple
final
of you
thing was
before you
I
go back.
agree with Nadia that I would want to be both at No Build and Churchill at the same time, and so sort of if there is any way to sequence, that would be great.
Thank you. That's good feedback. Okay. Greg and then Im Young.
I mean, I share a lot of the concerns about how productive this meeting will be, but we always seem to be limited on time at this particular meeting, as we are now, and never seem to be able to get into a real detailed discussion with some open questions on everything. And I would encourage the consultants who are coming to be prepared for us to ask questions like, if we change this, what does that do to the cost? What does that do to the traffic? Can you give us, I know we're engineers and it's really, really hard, but it's like when you're getting your house renovated. Is it really expensive or really not expensive to knock out this wall? And they'll never tell you. If we ask a question like, what if there's, 2 lanes instead of 4, or 1 lane instead of 2, or 2% instead of 1%, are we talking about not a big difference or a big difference? And I think then 4 hours could be productively spent.
Yeah.
And I'll
Okay, well,
stand
and
back.
as many of those types of questions we can get ahead of time, the more productive it will be, because Etty and Millette will have their team bone up on that, so we don't have to say, we don't know, we didn't know you were going to ask that. So that's why we've been asking for 2 months now to get these questions, and we don't have them from everybody. So I don't want to read who's missing, but if you're missing and you've got some things that are in the back of your head, or even if you've submitted, we will continue to take submissions, because it's really important for this to be productive, because we are spending a lot of time and resources, and we want it to be great for you. All right, Im Young, you've got the floor.
The Churchill Viaduct option was introduced last community meeting and then council voted for it, so we added in, right? So now we have a solution for it. So do you have a details how much it costs? Do you have a detail?
So that's going to be in our presentation
Right,
today.
today, right?
So we have
Okay.
a 3D animation. We do not have costs today, but we will have
Have
those.
it by that next 27th.
No, we'll have it by the 25th.
25th, yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then we'll
all right.
talk about it again on the 27th.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Tony and Phil. Okay, Phil.
I have something just popped into my mind a second ago. Will Caltrain be prepared to speak on behalf of the Union Pacific Railroad to the extent that there are any freight rail operating issues that might be impacted by, say, the choice of vertical grades? I don't know, I'm just asking, will Caltrain, is Caltrain?
I don't know if Melissa would be prepared to speak on that. We'll put it down and we could flag it for her.
Caltrain has a process about how the grade exceptions are looked at, and freight is an element of that, but not driving it exclusively.
Okay, so I'll flag it for Melissa. We'll make sure we get that to her. Okay, I think Nadia had her hand up, and I see Tony again, who might have thought of what it was, and then,
So, as I stare at this longer, I think, Eileen, maybe the reason a lot of people haven't turned in their questions is I think until this meeting, nobody really understood what this meeting was for. Was it for the public or was it for us? And so if this was for us, I think we might have approached the level of questions differently than if we're asking for the rest of the general public. I also would like to hear from our newest XCAP members, because, for those of us who've been doing this for about a year now, we're ready to dig in. But for you guys, you guys didn't even get an introduction the last time the traffic consultant spoke, so I don't see how you're going to be able to sit at all the tables and sort of absorb in the same way. And I just feel like At the last meeting, we had Billy Riggs who talked about not being able to just evaluate intersection drawings like we have apparently coming later in the presentation, that you need to understand the pulse networks and stuff. All of those things are really important. And so maybe if we could take an informal assessment of how the group feels about having all of us go through each one of those bullet points rather than having breakout tables, or does everybody want breakout tables? I don't know what but I think it would be really important to get that sense from the rest of the XCAP members, because I mean, I don't see how if we're all sitting at different tables, how is this, the new people are really getting caught up, and the old people are going to be maybe more interested in some of the newer stuff that might come out. I don't know. It's just, I'd love to hear from you guys.
I don't see the purpose of separate tables. If what's being discussed at that table is of interest, everyone should hear that.
Okay. Tony?
So the last time we did a charrette, not a design workshop, we sort of looked at all the alternatives that were presented at night with a table of experts, nationally known and internationally known experts. They evaluated them and reported back the next day. So it was a 2-day charrette, though. So my suggestion is that maybe we look at these alternatives the next day or so, and then come up with ideas if there are several tables rather than one table.
I'm also noticing that the South Palo Alto Tunnel is going to be one of the breakout topics, or one of the topics. That apparently isn't coming until the very next meeting. So for all the other options, we've had many months of videos and staring at stuff to come up with questions. We haven't seen anything on the South Palo Alto Tunnel, and so to the extent that there's something ready, I would really hope that we get that sooner rather than later, so we can be prepared for the meeting on the 25th, and then actually have ready questions on the 27th, because otherwise, I mean, there's no way we're going to be able to evaluate that. Even the traffic conversation, I understand why we focused on Churchill, but there have been, I think there's still questions about the traffic related to Charleston and Meadow. I mean, something I've raised repeatedly is that if the grade separations at Charleston and Meadow no longer exist, and we now have stacking lanes for cars to turn, and you no longer wait for the train, you suddenly have a really crazy inducement of traffic at those traffic signals. And we haven't looked at what that would mean to the network. We haven't looked at what it means for bikes and pedestrians. And I think I put it in my list of things, but I don't think we should limit the traffic conversation to just Churchill. I think we need to look citywide, and that was what Billy Riggs talked about as well. And then also with Churchill, it's not just the surrounding streets of Churchill. We talked about El Camino and Embarcadero. We talked about the entrance to Town and Country. These have been brought up repeatedly, and we haven't seen more stuff on that.
Phil?
Yeah, so when I saw the item about breakouts, I had somehow assumed that was for local community input in the spirit of the other community meetings. But if we're not focusing on the community, then I don't see the point of these breakouts, because to Nadia's point, we all need to hear all the stuff.
Okay, that's fine. No one's arguing back on that one. We taking this good advice, just like renaming last time. So Keith?
Forgive my ignorance. Big picture, what is the goal here?
I'm going to have the city manager outline the reason why we have this meeting and the whole point of it again.
It may sound repetitive, but I'll give it a try. Again, over the course of many months, there have been a number of questions, such as the 1% versus 2%. There have also been questions of how high does the viaduct really need to be, as high as it's proposed? What are some options in order to decrease that? Would that reduction in height make a significant difference in either the cost or the length? Why a shoe fly is necessary. So it's really to give the XCAP an opportunity to have that deeper discussion than had really been possible, recognizing that, as was noted earlier, a lot of this information has been provided real time, which is some of the I'll call it the risk and the downside of having this open workshop format that we've had as the evaluation has proceeded.
So be primarily between the engineers and the XCAP.
Yes.
That's where the information is going to be flowing.
Yes.
So Ed, if a new idea comes up, to Larry's point, and who decides how that goes where, when? I mean, are we going to vote as a group to say, well, yeah, we all XCAPers decide we want to actually officially send City Council a message that this new thing that we didn't know about has come forward? Like, how does that work?
I think that's a hypothetical not worth considering, quite frankly, because if someone's hiding a alternative that we haven't heard
Haven't
about.
discussed the roundabout. The roundabout's not on there.
We will talk about the roundabout at the workshop.
But again, I mean, I don't want to, otherwise it seems like you're shutting down. Maybe there is a really good idea that comes out, and we're not allowing for the possibility that something would be able to go to council, or how we would organize that.
Well, and that's the dilemma
But
that
the
we
council was
always have,
specific in the
as
motion.
Larry pointed out, that the council's always confronted with the possibility that there is something that has not been presented previously will be presented in the 11th hour. And institutionally, we can't preclude that possibility. Practically, I would tell you, again, I find that very unlikely to be the case here.
Adina?
So with regard to that topic, I think it might be helpful to split that into two kinds of things. Because I think that with regard to like a trench versus a hybrid and so on, like I don't know if those horses are dead in terms of having all the options on the table, but you know, the horses are pretty unwell. There's a lot of options that have been very, very, you know, like considered many times. However, in terms of the roadway configurations and the, you know, bike and pedestrian implications of the roadway configurations, like that is much, 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 much less mature, and the likelihood that new ideas will come out about that are much higher. And it's not even clear to me whether when city council is being asked to choose a grade separation alternative, will council at the same time be choosing an alternative about reconfiguring the Embarcadero interchange, or would that be on a separate timeline and process? So I'm wondering whether there needs to be a separate bucket for the process of getting new ideas, vetting ideas, making decisions on those like roadway questions, than for the grade separations themselves.
Okay. City Manager, do you want to answer the question about process and how that would be presented to the City Council?
Well, I'll give you a off the top of my head reaction. May not be the right one, but I'll give you my honest reaction, which is that in large measure, the charge of this effort is to define options related to the grade separations, because we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars required for any one of these variations. The roadway alternatives, I think at this point, are largely more of a, I'll call it feasibility study, in that do we have options for I'll just use Churchill as an example because I think folks are familiar enough with it, that if the Churchill closure were to be viable, it requires a level of feasibility of the alternatives, the street modifications, to confirm that we are in the ballpark of being able to mitigate the impacts of the closure. And I think that's the question we're trying to answer right now. It wouldn't be to design to a construction level what might happen at Embarcadero and El Camino or at Alma, but again, to determine that initial planning level feasibility. So that's one. At the same time, as it relates to the grade separation options, though, the cost as well as potential property impacts of the options that we're discussing are at a magnitude that we are trying to eliminate one or other options.
Can you explain what is the consensus recommendation that we as a body are supposed to do?
Depending on what the council chooses to do with the RBRIC, there may not be a consensus recommendation coming out of the XCAP.
Okay, but assume that up until this point, what did we assume? Because we're 3 meetings in, we still don't really understand what we're doing. We still don't really understand like how this is all going. And so, I mean, we're trying to give feedback on a meeting that will happen on the 27th after the RBRIC conversation. And so in some ways, we can't really help architect the meeting on the 27th if we don't really understand what the council turns around and tells us, no, you know what, in fact, we want the XCAP to do the following. So how do we make sure that we have clarity in time for Eileen to throw us this wedding?
If you buy into the way, as I described earlier, we could think about how the progress of the work is structured, going from a phase of understanding what the options are to then community conversations about pros, cons, like it, don't like it, to then decisions about the options, then the design workshop is still really all about understanding the options and ensuring that as a group, folks have had their questions in order to both understand personally the options as well as ensure that the way that they're described can be communicated to the community more broadly has been adequately handled.
Okay, Judy, you haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Well, I'm on record as being against the RBRIC. That's not news to some people at this table. I won't go into that right now. I'm a little disappointed, and it's based on my ignorance about this, I'm sure, but I'm a little disappointed that this is only this group that's going to be in the workshop. Did we decide that's the name? I thought we did, but anyway. Because, first of all, I can't be there. It's my college reunion, and I bought tickets a long time ago. And I'm the only one representing the business community. That is not adequate input, discussion, analysis, and feedback from those that count on participating and collaborating with the neighborhoods so that there is an efficient and appropriate flow of all kinds of traffic, particularly at high points of work movement. Workforce movement. And so I'm a little disappointed because I was really hoping there would be some opportunity for the business community to get a little more up to speed. Now, I can understand.
As I recall in the last minutes, I wrote an action item that the staff and the team were going to coordinate with you for your own group for the business community. That's an action item that's in the minutes.
That would be good.
Yeah, and it's an action item in the minutes. So
Okay,
as they
well-
prepare for all of this, I think the plan would be to do a version of that with your group,
A version of this.
of this whole thing, so they can really understand it. Because a lot of times business people don't come to community meetings because it's just not really
Well,
the
they
same
won't come
thing.
during the workday,
No.
you know, so
Yeah.
that's, so, well, I'm glad to hear that. I'll look forward to making some arrangements and making that work because the business community obviously is very interested in not just workforce flow, but making sure that this all works together. You don't, one car doesn't, you know, that's a worker's car and that's a resident car. And by the way, there's an enormous amount of crossing through Palo Alto traffic. And so if you imagine Palo Alto as being in the middle of a graphic, you've got Facebook on one end, Google on the other end, Stanford up here, Research Park, and we're in the middle. It's not just Palo Alto traffic, and it is not just Palo Alto businesses. So it's important to try to get that. So there's no way the business community is going to sit through 10 meetings and get to the level of this that is required to really participate, but certainly it would be great if after this workshop, which I'm really sorry I won't be a part of, but it would be great if after this workshop there was some kind of a document that would be readable and not too technical, that, and particularly in a tabular form, where, you know, there was on a scale of 3, this one is a 1, that's a great.
So we do have matrices, which I believe there's going to be an example here that will be
Okay.
for all of them. I think that might be useful
Yeah.
for your group.
Yeah, just
And we
to
could build a
visualize it.
presentation around going through all of the options, not only from a physical sense and show the videos, but also costs and construction impacts and all those things are outlined.
So I won't spend any more time on what the business community can do, but it would be great if there was some combined way at some point. I hate to have these walls between the business community, many of whom live in this community, by the way, and the so-called, you know, residents who aren't the business community but want to support it. But I will just jump in because I won't be there. I will say that if I were going to be there, I would want to learn from as many people as possible about the whole thing. I would prefer to see everybody in a conversation together. Maybe you break out for the first, you know, hour, but then it would be great to have everybody. There's nothing better than groupthink, I think.
Okay, thank you. Megan.
My very quick recommendation would be since there seems to be quite a bit of interest in sequencing these, and perhaps we wouldn't have time during this workshop for all 6 of them, or 5 of them, however many there are, could either right now in this group or potentially email to you like what our preferred ordering would be so that we could figure out what the group is most interested in tackling first.
That's a great suggestion. Are people prepared to do that? Do you have a suggestion? Since you've been a longtime member.
My suggestion was kind of from like least information to most information, which dropping alternatives no longer considered would for me be like no build, Churchill traffic and viaduct, or South Tunnel, because we have no information about that, then Churchill traffic and viaduct, and then the Charleston Meadow options.
So kind of go from the bottom up.
No, yeah, no, yes, dropping alternatives. Yeah, no build, South Tunnel, Churchill, Charleston Meadow.
And we will be doing the South Tunnel at the next meeting. And we are going to do more. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Anybody else? I know we've kind of gone around. I see Tony's hand up. Anybody else? Because I do want to give the public an opportunity. If there are any people who have a thought about this before we move on, because I do want to make sure we do get to our engineering and technical and video and everything else. So seeing none, Tony, you're on. Or if you, again, we know the protocol. If you're ready to speak, please go to the podium. Susie's going to kick us off over there. Go ahead, Tony.
This question about the business community, and we did some outreach there in downtown Palo Alto, and and there was vehement opposition to closing Palo Alto Avenue, which constrains what we can and cannot do along that downtown length. And I can describe the technical reasons why, but just that we don't come up with a solution that requires downtown to have a certain configuration. I'm reminded in the 60s and 70s about the Four Corners plan, Arizona, Nevada, the two highways didn't align. And so that's possible, that might happen here. And so we need to make sure that some idea of what's going to happen in the north side is congruent with what's going to happen in the south, and we don't have this misalignment problem.
Okay, Susan has the floor.
Well, first I just have a clarifying question. I couldn't tell in all the back and forth whether members of the public who feel themselves well enough educated to attend are welcome.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Then my next question is how can members of the public who want to be there and get something out of it and listen well, what is our best strategy for boning up on the kind of all of the alternatives that have been dismissed for various reasons, so that we understand the history, even if we're not talking about the alternatives no longer considered? I think it underpins the choices that are in front of us now. And I heard that there was stuff on the website, but I can't tell which one it is, because when I went to look for Connecting Palo Alto after Nadia showed it to me today, all I got was PA grade SIP. So I don't know if it's available to the members of the public yet, the new website.
So we said that earlier. Chantel's working with the AECOM folks to have it by the end of the week. It's our first action item from today's meeting.
Okay, so that's good. And if there's any direction for us about what the best places to look for this information would be,
So I'm going to ask Etty and Millette, because you all kind of tried to assemble some of the materials you used to get yourselves up to speed from an engineering perspective. And a lot of this work predates the AECOM team.
Right.
And so there are some older documents out there, and maybe Chantel can also jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, wasn't there at some point at one of the council meetings where we did, one of the staff reports did a history
Yep.
of how each alternative came about and was eliminated when we got it down to like the last 7 or something?
I want to say it was the beginning of this year.
Yeah, I think it was like around the January time.
January timeframe, maybe a council report. When was it? January 22nd, so council meeting. There was a lot of information. There was a graphic put together because we kept getting the same questions, which make total sense. How did we get to whatever the number is today, 7 or whatever, from 30 or 40? So there was a timeline.
It was a big reduction.
And some reasoning behind it, and also some other dates so that you could go back into the council meetings and see why they made the decisions they made. So there's a lot of history.
So wait, where would I got
January 22nd, the city council meeting.
And then you said other dates. What was
Well,
that
if
about?
you go into that
will
presentation, there's a
refer.
timeline where it might say 2 years prior to that, there was a big council meeting where you could look at that tape too.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So Susan, we'd be happy to work with you on the particulars of following up there. I think not to lose the essence of this exchange, though. What it is pointing out that in preparation for the November meetings, and when we do have our meetings that are focused on the general public, really critical that we have all of that handy and digestible manner that doesn't require people to do a lot of research. So we get that.
No, I agree with that, but I mean, I've been to all of those meetings, and I find them extremely unsatisfying because it's going by way too fast, and I don't understand the rationale behind the justifications some of the time, and I have questions about it. I can't ask them, you know. So I would like to understand it in better depth, so when I talk to people in my neighborhood about what's going on, I can give them a decent explanation, and even just for my own satisfaction. And then I had one other comment, which was, well, maybe two. I guess this has already been said, but the choice among the grade separation options obviously depends so much on what is going to be happening on the roadways as a result of doing A or doing B, and I'm thinking of Churchill closure, of course, but I think it must be true elsewhere too. And so I kind of wanted to just highlight that and understand when mitigations or that are seen as absolutely necessary for an option to be okay, when would those start to happen? I mean, if, say, you close Churchill and all hell breaks loose on Embarcadero and Oregon and El Camino, how long will it be before things, you know, is there a coordinated plan for addressing traffic concerns and the grade separations? And then just one final thing, which is I understood that there was a discussion about new ideas or not, and I wanted to say maybe there would be some hybrid ideas that would somehow come out that might be useful.
I think that's spot on. Steve?
One thing she said, the question of how do I learn what's going on and how do I ask questions? I think we on the CAP should actually be better prepared and organized to help when a bunch of people are saying, whoa, what's happening here? Explain why this decision was made. We didn't make any of the decisions.
Right.
But we have been to a lot of meetings and read a lot of things, and maybe we could find a way. I found the same thing at the community meeting. There were people with questions who were going directly to the AECOM consultants, asking questions that, you know, wasn't their job to answer, and we could have helped.
And that's why we introduced you at those meetings, and you will be introduced on November 7th, but that's a great point, Greg. And I do want to highlight for the XCAP members that Chantel had sent you a Survey Monkey to get your questions, and if now after this conversation you want to go back out, that should be openable. Now I'm making up words like Adina. Even if you've already submitted, you can resubmit. So, right, Chantel? So, yes. So, please don't feel like, oh, I already hit send. It won't let me do it again. It will let you do it again.
Well, could I say one more thing? Just scanning quickly through the questions, and I didn't get to read them in detail, but the kinds of questions that, you know, Ed was just talking about getting answered seem kind of different from some of the questions I read on Nadia's page as I was scanning through, which goes into deep assumptions about things. And I don't think they're at the level of, is it cheaper to do 1% or 2%? I think it's at a different level. And so I'd be interested to know what you're going to do with those.
Can I, Eileen,
Sure,
I found
Nadia.
the notes from the previous meeting, and I know I had specifically asked, for example, what is the timeline for what is the city's position on the Embarcadero grade SEP? And for example, what is the status of like the pump that's on the Embarcadero grade SEP? And I didn't see that captured in the notes, and it was definitely something that we've asked actually a few times. So it'd be really helpful to get that information in terms of Josh Mello had mentioned that it's built in 1936. At some point, you replace those things for seismic reasons and otherwise, and kind of what is the plan around those? Those are very specific things that have been called out several times that still wasn't captured.
Okay, thank you. I'm writing it again. And I see Millette writing it as well. All right, yes, Steve.
I know we're behind, and so super quickly, just a practical question. This pertains to new ideas. We have a fairly informed resident who's come forward with idea about a variation on a previously rejected idea that he thinks addresses some of the reasons it was rejected. If he's, and I understand that the odds are against anything else being considered at this point, But my question is, if he's willing to put a little more time and effort into it and mock it up, who could he send that to? Is there somebody on the team that's willing to receive new ideas like that?
I'll take it.
Yeah, we also have an email address on the website that goes to Chantel, and she distributes it. So those types of things have come in from other community members, and the AECOM team has taken a look at those in the past.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All righty. Yes,
Hello.
from our PTC.
Yes. Billy, sorry he couldn't be here today, but thank you for mentioning his eagerness to participate. I think that was a question I had about the upcoming design workshop. I'm very reluctant to hear Ed say not to invite community members. That seems very concerning for me. What I would suggest, if you continue with that approach, is perhaps invite the whole PTC. That might be a way to get some community members and engaged people involved. We are eager to get more involved in the rail design process in general. We have a lot to say, as I'm sure you've heard from Billy's suggestions in previous meetings. I think that might be a nice intermediate step. If it turns out that the concern is that we haven't brought the public up to speed and that the level of engagement may not be productive, I think that's on you guys to make sure that you're providing documents that will allow people who want to get engaged to get up to speed very quickly. So, thank you.
Yep. Next.
Hi, good afternoon. So this is more as a general public person. I wouldn't know how to submit a question, but something that's multiple grade steps. In the context of a viaduct solution, where there are viaducts, potentially the shoe fly being a single track shoe fly, and you increment one track at a time up on a bridge or a viaduct, and just the pros and cons of that. Because, you know, building a shoe fly is like building it twice in many ways. So if you could take it down to one track, you save a lot of money that could be used for something else to do it, and that might trade the land you need and stuff. So it depends on the design and where the new tracks are going. So it's not a slam for everywhere, but I think it's one of those things. Caltrain has never done this in the past, but like San Mateo downtown is very tight. It's like operationally, they need two tracks, whether that's one old track, one new track, unless there's a station involved, it shouldn't matter. They need two tracks. So it could be done like a track at a time for certain elements. And so that would be just something, given the design thing, what you're trying to do to maybe understand that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we do have a viaduct conversation on the dais today, so let's see if we can get some of that information into the world at this meeting. Yes, sir.
Hi, I've participated in a few meetings, and my suggestion to the group would be to not call it a design workshop, because it really isn't a design workshop. They never have been, in my experience. I'd be all for, as a resident, here having an open meeting at like a fishbowl, where you're having your discussion, you're learning things, and then you're giving us a chance to come up and ask clarifying questions, with a caveat that you give us homework beforehand and say, read this, all these links that we've put together, assembled for you, so you can follow the conversation. Because we're no longer in design, we're in decision making, and I think that should be made clear to the public.
Thank you. No, I think that's a great suggestion. It kind of follows on what the city manager mentioned about making sure this is easy to find as we notice this. So maybe we could put some energy into making that a one-stop shop somewhere, so that those of you who have been so engaged, and we really do appreciate you following along and being so thoughtful with your comments. So with that, I am going to move us on. I'm sorry, Adina, I think I see your hand, but we really want to spend some time on this Embarcadero Alma renderings and Churchill Viaduct. And so let's get that information out, and then I will start with you. Okay. All right, well, you need to be microphone on.
And that is a way to, I think, like I'm hearing, and I agree with the comments that telling people they are unwelcome is wrong. It's not the right thing if it's open to the public meeting. At the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying this is a 301 level class. This is a graduate seminar. And if you are either already up to speed and ready to come, or you are willing to read this 300-page prep book and be prepared to deal with the level of information at a 301 class, feel free to
audit it.
audit this graduate level class. And I think disclosing it that way will help people understand whether they will be able to get something out of it and contribute to it without chasing people away that would appropriately want to participate.
Yep, great suggestion. Okay, I am moving us on. Peter, I think, is it you to kick this off, or Etty or Millette, are you going to tee it up and then Peter kicking it off, or how do we want to do this?
You missed it. So today we're going to here to talk about the Churchill closure and as well as the Churchill Viaduct. We have a 3D animation. Peter's going to talk about some of the alternatives that were talked about a little bit last week and kind of go a little deeper. And then John here is going to give a presentation on the viaduct design as it's been developed so far to date. So, Peter.
Great, thanks, Eddie. Let's just dive right in. Yeah, so this is the alternative that we took a look at a few weeks ago. We're going to take a closer look at it here. So this is the Embarcadero Alma alternative, where we create a signalized intersection via Kingsley. So it's creating the connections from Alma to and from Embarcadero. Next slide. This is just a variation of the same alternative. The main difference here is that the High Street connection to Embarcadero exists as it is today. So, for example, you can't make a left turn from High Street onto Embarcadero. This is a bird's eye view. Let me just orient everyone here real quick. The Emerson intersection is just off the image on the bottom, and El Camino is just off the image at the top. We have the Caltrain tracks, click one button, running across the screen there in red. And then next one. So this is a 3D rendering of the exhibit that we just saw. This is the variation that shows the full connection with High Street. I'm just going to talk quickly about some high-level features of this alternative. We have a ped bike overcrossing over Embarcadero on the top of the screen there. We have a right turn pocket from eastbound Embarcadero onto Kingsley. There's widening on the Alma Street Bridge to allow for 2 lanes of traffic in each direction on Alma. And this also allows for a left turn pocket from southbound Alma onto Kingsley. As mentioned before, would be converted to a signalized intersection with some restrictions. One being that the direct movement from westbound Embarcadero onto the slip ramp or the frontage would not be allowed in this configuration. This is, again, just a concept, just an idea. Nothing's etched in stone at this point, but this is what this concept is showing. The other restriction with the signalized intersection here would be no left turns allowed from eastbound Embarcadero onto High Street. It's physically possible to make that turning movement, but our traffic engineer, Gary, who's not here, he recommends not allowing this left in this configuration to just allow the intersection to operate better.
Do you have a question, Nadia?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. So in this picture, if you come off of Alma onto Kingsley, can you go straight onto High Street?
Yeah, in this configuration you can.
So if there's a backup on Alma, people could now turn onto Kingsley and then take High Street up?
Right. So I know one of the... Sure, go ahead.
Let's let him get through. Unless we're not here to discuss this yet, we'll get through it and then we'll discuss it.
Yeah, I'm almost done, actually.
Is it a clarifying question, Larry? Oh, great.
Go
perfect.
ahead.
That's exactly what I wanted. I just don't want opinions yet. Let's get clarifications.
I'm not understanding how you get from Embarcadero onto Alma.
So, sure, yeah. From either direction,
You've taken out the little off-ramp. I'm heading west.
Right.
So how do I get onto Alma if I'm driving?
Sure, yeah. So from if you're on westbound Embarcadero coming from Emerson, you'd make a left turn at the intersection onto Kingsley, and then you'd reach the T intersection onto Alma. So you go left or right onto Alma. If you're coming from the other direction on Embarcadero, you just make the right turn onto Kingsley. Now, I know there was one of the main concerns with this is related to the Churchill closure. So one of the main concerns with the closure of the crossing at Churchill is the traffic on northbound Alma, for example, who's trying to get to the high school or to the town and country. They'd be forced to come up to this area, because you can't make a left on Churchill, right? They'd make a right onto Lincoln, and then make a right onto Emerson to get onto Barcadero. So this alternative alleviates that problem. It takes the traffic out of the residential neighborhoods and puts it onto the Kingsley into the intersection at Embarcadero.
I could just, sorry,
All
I
right,
have.
Judy and then Larry, do you want to do?
I'm sorry, just
Yeah, do you
repeat,
have a laser pointer?
how do you get from Embarcadero to south on Alma?
So yeah, either direction.
Here.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, he said there's no left turn.
No left from this way.
Well, what's that? That says no left turn.
Yeah, yeah, it's for the other direction. So, yeah, so if you're going,
So that's the red thing. You wouldn't be able to do the red movement.
when I put that slide up, I was thinking that might
upside
confuse
down.
people. So you cannot make the left only from eastbound Embarcadero. From westbound, you're good. You can make the left onto Kingsley. Sorry for that confusion.
Can you also explain the logic behind widening the Embarcadero Bridge? Because right now it serves as a natural way to slow people down so that when
Sure.
they enter the downtown, they
Sure.
take a different pace. So why would we make that faster?
Yeah, that was input from Gary Black from Hexagon. He says for this to operate
Why?
adequately.
How does that impact any of the turns you're talking about?
Effectively 2 lanes going north on Alma, where today it's really not 2 lanes going north on Alma because people race in order to get into one.
That's right.
And that I understand, but I guess I'm still asking, in terms of fixing a Churchill problem, is it because there would create some type of network backup I'm unaware of? Because I get that might be something that people might like, but I mean, one of the things that I think it does is it's probably not something we would design today if you were building a new bridge, but it does serve a purpose. And the idea of a road diet there is something that should probably be discussed as a policy position. This just seems like a tweak for the sake of a tweak, but not necessarily needed.
It's a good question, and I think it's a question that we're going to have to ask Gary to explain back to us.
Can I ask my pedestrian question again?
Yeah.
How does a pedestrian get from the high school to town and country?
On the new bridge.
So yeah, the pedestrian bridge at the top of the screen would allow that crossing over Embarcadero.
Will there be stairs, or will the high school kids be required to make a big loop-de-loop?
Yeah, the details for that haven't been worked out, but I mean, those are the things we could hash out with you.
Tony?
I have 5 things that will probably come up at community meetings. Firstly, the drive around block. I can't vote for something that makes traffic go through a neighborhood, Alma, Lincoln High. I think it's just not in Palo Alto's DNA to do that, and so be careful with that issue.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Tony?
The Barber block that we heard about, right?
Yeah, the drive-through block, drive-around block.
Yep.
Just to be clear, it eliminates what's currently happening. It's actually not to High, but it's to Emerson, that as people want to go west on Embarcadero, they currently go north on Alma, turn right on Lincoln, turn right on Emerson, and then swing through here.
Yeah, so-
Because you can't do this, right? Because that's.
You can't make the left from Kingsley either.
You can't make a right.
Oh, and you can't make a left on
I see.
Kingsley either. Today.
Today. But you would in the future. So that would eliminate it.
So today, if you're going north on Alma, instead of doing this big loop,
Yes,
you would turn right and turn left at the new signal.
I see, okay.
That's the concept.
The
Thanks for clarifying.
second issue, thank you.
Regarding how you get from Embarcadero to go north on Alma?
Yeah, that's another one.
To go north on Alma, if you're going west on Embarcadero, currently to go north on Alma, you race through here, and so don't be a pedestrian at this corner, right? This is not the place you want to be. So in this concept, you would turn left onto Kingsley and then right onto Alma.
So the next question is the disruption. I think you're going to close down Alma and close down Embarcadero for a year and a half. I think we need to look at those externalities, those costs, and put them in, because we cannot be putting the cost, to use Greg's first meeting term, cannot be taxing the man behind the tree, which is the cost that we put onto general public, but we don't incorporate it into the costs of the project, which is the cost of disruption, the cost of delays. Third issue is, I think you need a cost for this whole thing, including disruption. And if it's probably in the 150 million range, probably, but we need to have some idea of that. The new bridge, it's a historic bridge, not that I love it, but it is historic. And we need to be careful with that. On the, I think you also need to look at land uses that Palo Alto High School, access to Palo Alto High School, how do peds and bikes work? And access to town and country, how does that work? It might be that when you look at those land use issues, town and country might have another little sliver of their project that relates to the neighborhood, that relates to Palo Alto High School. So I would suggest looking at land uses a little bit beyond where you are.
Peter, did you have anything you wanted to add in response?
No.
Just a
Yep,
quick
Bill?
question. It sounds like the intersection at Embarcadero and Kingsley is going to get very busy.
It's already busy.
Well, but it could get even busier with all the turning movements. Has anybody done a timing to see how many turning movements an hour and what is the total intersection throughput?
Yeah, Gary has taken a preliminary look at that. He said this operates pretty well, but they're also looking at traffic in the future.
Yeah,
So
do you know what level of service he's come
I
up with?
don't know. I don't have those details.
Next meeting.
Next meeting,
Well,
but he'll
and-
be here and at the workshop.
Piggybacking on that, Eileen, could we make a note in the record? I really think we need to make a specific outreach if possible to, I don't know, I've yet to come across folks that live on Kingsley. I don't think we have any here in the audience. But, oh, good, fabulous. But I think we need more, I think I'd really want to make sure we have enough outreach to those guys so that they understand exactly what's going on.
So who's responsible for that outreach? No, but.
That'll be the city.
Yeah, city.
That'll be the city. And again,
Us,
buy into my
also.
framework for a second. We are understanding the option. There will be subsequently lots of debate on pros and cons and trade-offs among the options. But you're really helping us make sure that we got the right questions.
I have
Okay,
a couple
Megan.
of questions about this option. There appears to be, from Alma going north, I guess, there's like a dead end into where High is. It's like green in the other view of it. What is that for? Is that for access for those homes, for those driveways?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how to point at it.
Yes.
If you can go back a
Yeah,
little.
step back a couple slides.
One more. Yeah,
Yeah.
that green square. What's going on there?
Right. So in this one, we're trying to create some kind of
Landscaping.
you know, this could be some landscaping because we're removing the connection from westbound Embarcadero directly to that frontage. I know it's called Embarcadero, but yeah. So we wouldn't allow that movement. So we'd have to put something there to physically, so people could see, like, all right, I can't drive on this on that area.
Okay. So that's the whole goal of that. Okay, I was just trying to figure out why that like lane existed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those details haven't been worked out, but that area wouldn't be used in the future to make that movement.
Okay. Going to Tony's point, the with High Street connection option does allow a loop through Lincoln and High, it appears here.
Right, on the previous, if you go
Is
back
there,
one.
Does Gary have data
Oh,
on
sorry, go forward one.
whether that would be used, whether everyone would go on Kingsley, or sort of, I guess I'm wondering why that of the two options is the one that was rendered versus the other one. Is it like
I
better
think
in
just
terms of traffic?
Yeah, just due to time constraints. We had just presented this a few weeks ago, so we just rendered one. It doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the other. I think Gary's initial input is that both of these work well.
Okay. My final question was, yes, about the the bike connection, so like Kingsley right here dead ends into Embarcadero, but Kingsley actually exists up above Emerson, and it's a bike connection to Palo through this underpass. And so has there been discussion of connecting sort of that like top, I don't know how to point at anything up here, but the top crosswalk, like underneath the ends in connection, actually needs to connect to the underpass, if that makes sense.
Well, it's actually under
no,
here.
it's not.
So the concept here was to, for those who are familiar with the bike plant that had been developed that includes a connection up to Kingsley there, would be to actually continue that through this section.
Right. And so I just have questions about, like, Gary said he thought it could be done, but I would like that to be clarified, that there's enough space for both this traffic light and a potential bike lane to connect Kingsley up there to the underpass.
Okay, Adina?
I think a question or suggestion, so this is, there's a lot of valid concern about the car traffic implications of closing Churchill and wanting to have solutions for people driving, but this also has a lot of implications for people that are walking and bicycling, including, kids that are going to Palo, and also, if you think about like making it easy to get to town and country from the community around side, like in community discussions about traffic, you hear people say like, wow, it took me 25 minutes to drive a mile to town and country, and there certainly are people who are either going to get large objects or people that don't have the physical ability to walk or bike for a mile, but you could have walked or biked in less than 25 minutes. So can the different treatments and ideas also include a full illustration of the pedestrian and bike implications so that people can think about this in terms of how this affects and could improve or worsen those connections on multiple modes and not just driving.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Similar to what we did for Middle, right?
Right.
Yeah. For any more questions at the table? I see Keith, and I see Larry.
I'm confused about the orange bike bridge. There's a bike overpass right along Alma that goes right by the high school and goes to Town and Country. What is this serving that the current one doesn't serve? They look like they're 50 yards apart.
No, they come out in vastly different places. I don't believe you can get to that front part of Town and Country from that, unless
yeah, you can.
So if we could have Peter do it, or Gary, Greg, if you're going to do it, if you would please be on the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is just one idea. Just an early concept here, but the intent there for that one leg of the orange is to connect that overcrossing over Embarcadero that could serve, let's say, the Town and Country, but could also serve the bike path that runs parallel to Alma. So currently, let's say you were on the bike path along Alma, you would cross Embarcadero, but there would be no connection towards the high school at this location. Maybe there is further south.
Yeah, I understand the leg on the bottom of the screen, but the bridge that goes across to Town and Country, you can access from Trader Joe's. There's an access right onto that ramp there. Right. Yeah. You can bike.
Okay.
I ride my bicycle
Maybe
on that.
not understand the question.
This is redundant. This exists here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just made it a bit closer so that the high school kids who are used to queuing here and crossing the
right.
street for lunch will now cross here. But the reality is, you can save that because you're crossing right here.
Right.
Now, there was a question raised the last time about how do you stop 7,000 high school students from lunch when it's across the street?
Right.
And London solves that problem with these metal barriers that don't let them across.
Right.
But the question is, are they going to cross here? Are they going to cross all the way over here? Or are they just going to run it en masse?
Okay, Keith, we got your question?
Well, let me weigh in on this one. Clearly there's some further work that's necessary here. I think the initial concept here was just to have it be a pedestrian overcrossing to replace the signal. Right here you've got the signal. So this comes out as a part of, just making this work, quite frankly, for motor vehicles. But then to replace it with a pedestrian bridge, the street goes down. And so the question is, how far does this need to go in order to have this structure clear the street, whether it needs to be all the way over here or back here, is really a function of ADA ramp, grade, as well as the clearance necessary in order to get cars under the bridge. So that's something that needs to be looked at.
Okay, Larry's got the floor. Adina, you just had the floor. We'll come back around to you.
Okay. It seems to me that the key to this plan is the new traffic light on just west of High Street. What's the analysis of the impact on traffic of people stopping at that traffic light now? Because I drive that area quite frequently, and in the afternoon you see backups from Alma, from the bridge all the way to Waverly and sometimes even Calvert.
So our traffic consultant, Gary Black from Hexagon, he did take an initial look at this, and he said it.
Acceptable levels.
Yes, he said it operated. It operated well. I can't really give you any more information than that. I'm sorry. I can't give you specifics. I wish you were here to really
Gary's
answer
on
that
vacation.
question
He'll
better
be here
for
at
you.
our next meeting.
Yeah, so detailed traffic questions are going to have to wait till Gary gets back.
Keep in mind, at least one traffic signal comes out in this plan, which is why they need the pedestrian overcrossing.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Barbara, and then Tony, and then Adina.
Yeah, so I understand we're just talking about the intersection here at Embarcadero and Alma primarily, and the benefits to this Forest High Street Emerson loop. The thing that we had met with Gary about was, I think if you're successful in improving the throughput on Embarcadero going west, remember that we closed Churchill, and that's a main avenue for cars to get to Palo. On that edge of the campus. So now we're redirecting all those people to Embarcadero. We're going to have a huge, massive backup trying to take a left-hand turn into Palo. And I know that a lot of people say, well, you'll just go down to Embarcadero and El Camino and take a left and then take a U-turn at Charleston. I mean, it's a problem. So we talked to Gary about that, and we're looking forward to some solutions. But that is definitely going to impact the peak traffic, right, in and out of Palo, and also El Camino is backed up as well. So
yeah, and I
we got
know
a lot
that
of
left
things to
turn
think about.
pocket into the high school on Embarcadero is very short as well. So.
It's a nightmare today.
Yeah, so that's a question that Gary's going to have to answer for us.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.
Okay, Tony, and then Adina.
So on this new bike bridge, good idea, but I don't see kids walking. It's the equivalent of 2.5 blocks.
That's what we're trying to say, yeah.
To go across a street. Not going to happen. Yeah, another option would be to use the existing bike bridge and reconfigure this theater district entry on this side and do something on the other side that attracts kids, and rather than spend this is another huge cost, right?
Okay, good point. Adina, and then I see Nadia.
So building on the previous comments, I would want in the material that illustrating the different implications of the different options for people using different modes, driving and walking and biking, I would want to see the time implications. So if people are expected to, kids walking are expected not to walk across the street, but to, go around a pedestrian loop, how much extra time would that be? And if a driver is waiting at an additional light cycle, how much time savings or addition that would be. So show the differences for people using different modes.
Yep, thank you. Nadia.
Again, this has been brought up previously. I wanted to understand when in 2017, Josh Mello did a presentation about which roads, how many emergency vehicles and how many school buses and whatever use the various crossings. And one of the things that came out, which was very interesting, is that most of the emergency vehicles do not use Embarcadero. They actually use Churchill, as well as a lot of trucks that apparently are not supposed to be using Churchill. And so the question would be around that crossing, that undercrossing at Embarcadero is only like 14.6, and I believe the normal clearance is 15 feet. So how does the closure of Churchill impact emergency vehicles? What rules guide that? Have we talked to first responders? Does the county have to weigh in on whatever things we're doing? We've been updating our fire buildings and whatnot. If you close Churchill, what does that mean in terms of emergency vehicles getting to the Southgate neighborhood, and how is that being addressed? Again,
evaluated, and we'll be reporting that at a future meeting.
Okay. All right, any other comments before we move on? I am going to take public comment, but I'm going to get the video out first. So we're going to, as I mentioned before, I'm only going to do public comment a couple times. So we're going to get the video, Churchill Viaduct, and John is here, John Mayer, who you might recall from previous meetings, is going to walk us through that.
Okay, let's just stop on this slide for 1 second here and do a quick explanation. On the left is the proposed Churchill Viaduct. The purple on the right is the Charleston Meadow Viaduct. Now, these are just shown for reference. These two projects are standalone projects and they're not linked together. So now we can start the video.
You want to just skip to the video?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can do the sections. We've got
We can do the
time.
sections. Okay, we've analyzed two options. One option would be that the permanent tracks remain on the current Caltrain alignment, and we would prepare a temporary track east of that alignment and impacting Alma Street. So by doing that, basically Alma Street would be reduced to 2 lanes during construction. And then the next slide would show the aerial guideway portion. Once you reach a certain height of retained fill, you can convert to the aerial structure, and both the aerial structure and the retained fills are the same width, so the remaining street is 2 lanes in Alma Street, 28.5 feet approximately. So option 2 would be to say, okay, let's use the existing Caltrain tracks as the temporary track, and let's put the permanent track on that landscaped area between the Caltrain tracks and Alma Street. At Meadow Charleston, this actually worked because there was 58 feet between the existing tracks and the edge of Alma. Here, there's only 38 feet, so it's 20 feet less. And so permanently, that new permanent track would impact Alma to the point of reducing it permanently to 2 lanes. And then again, this is the aerial structure version of it. So, you know, that's just to point out the complication of kind of doing what we did on Charleston Meadow. It doesn't seem to work here. Okay, in the video then.
Well, let's get the video out and then we'll take questions. I'm going to start with Greg at the questions.
Option 2, I mean, if you were to permanently reduce Alma Street to 2 lanes, that might not be a workable option.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Basically.
So for the northern
Right.
Oh, thank you.
And
Yeah.
that's what the video is.
Yeah, and the video is for the Churchill Viaduct. That's what the video is about to be shown. Okay.
Are we ready for the video?
Yep, we're ready.
Okay, here we go. This is the existing Caltrain tracks. And of course, on the south, there's the Charleston Meadow. The north, again, is the Churchill. So the first order of construction then would be to build the temporary shoe fly track. And then you would go in and build a viaduct and then remove the shoe fly track. So in constructing the shoe fly track, first would be to remove the vegetation and then go in and build the shoe fly track. And a part of the shoe fly track is this temporary barrier and fence, which was shown in the section, a K-rail and a fence. And then the traffic, both freight and Caltrain, would be on the shoe fly. And once the shoe fly has a certain separation from the existing tracks, the construction can begin. So you build the retained fill and then the actual viaduct portion. And the structure over Embarcadero, not Embarcadero, you're impacting Embarcadero there. Then you're building the retained fill, which is shown here, and now the actual viaduct, and then over Churchill, and the structure over Churchill. The viaduct continues to a point where then you convert back to retained fill and then back down again before the California Ave station.
So still video.
Yeah. So replace the, landscaping and so forth, restripe, and you're back in service.
Okay, I promised Greg he'd go first. I see Tony's hand up.
So, what is the nature of the structure that goes over in Barcadero? It was not clear to me because we're still on the retained fill part. We haven't gotten to the actual viaduct,
Right,
but we've
on
got to cross the
Embarcadero-
road.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, well, on the Embarcadero side, you're about, as you cross Embarcadero, you're up about 2 feet from the existing top of rail. And so, you're very close to what it is today. So the shoe fly itself would go off into Alma Street. Obviously, there'd have to be an upgrade of the Alma Street Bridge over Embarcadero. There would have to fill in the gap that currently exists between the Alma Street Bridge and the Caltrain Bridge. And, there'll be some structural issues in the interim to make that work.
Right. So then 2 other questions, and I'll be quiet. What about the Stanford Game Day Station? Does that retain?
No.
Okay.
No, it doesn't retain.
Yeah, I'll let someone from Stanford ask about that. And is there an opportunity with this option, and I guess other viaduct options or even trench options, for additional connectivity from one side of the tracks to the other for pedestrians or bikes? I won't even mention cars because that could, in any of these.
So the short answer is yes. That we have when you're in viaduct, you have a lot more openings through the structure, so connectivity, again, where those openings occurred, we'd have to take a look at, but there's an opportunity for connectivity.
Okay, Tony. And then
But
I see Adina.
It appears that you've used a 1% slope here, and the implications are that it extends over a much wider, longer section of you, obviously, if you use a 1% versus 2%. And that's the big impact, if you want to call it that we could save by using a 2%. So it doesn't go all the way.
Okay, do we want to speak to that, John? Did you
Okay,
assume the 1%?
No, on the southern approach from California Ave Station, it's a 1.4% slope, 1.6% slope. Okay.
1.6 going north.
It's if you were to start at the California Ave Station and you go north, okay, you're going to be on a 1.6% slope to get up and over Churchill. Then it's a very long vertical curve, and in order to get the appropriate tangent in between, which is 3 times velocity, then another vertical curve. That vertical curve, we tried to go as steep as we could to get down to avoid impacting Embarcadero, and we couldn't do it.
So it's a 1% down going north,
Yes.
but it does not impact the University Avenue Station.
No, the California Ave Station.
No, okay. So if I'm going north from
Oh, right. No, it does not impact it.
Does not impact it.
No, does not impact the University Ave Station.
Okay, Adina.
Yeah, this is a question not just about grade separation option, but in general, I have not heard in all of excessive paying attention to the Caltrain business plan and electrification, any discussion about the Stanford Game Day Station. Has anybody been paying attention to what the fate of that would be, even with existing proposed plans, with the need for safety and eventual longer platforms, and how much investment that would get, or how much neglect of investment would result in its eventual closure, and when? Is that something?
Anybody have anything to add there? Etty.
So this has just been developed, this alternative, so the next conversation would be to go talk with Caltrain on this. But the game day station right now is only used during Stanford football games, and so there is always an option, if there's the money, and this is an alternative that goes forward, that you could put a station in there, but it would be complicated and very, very expensive. Because right now, it's pretty much an asphalt.
My question is not just about this grade separation concept or not. There's some logical inferences you could draw from what Caltrain is planning to do, that station is probably not going to be in
It's
operation.
gone anyway.
Jim,
do you know whether
and
that's the
it
case?
was something that would be interesting to look into.
As far as I know, and I think Adina's right, it just hasn't really been on the discussion and nobody's really brought it up.
Okay, so we'll
I
flag
can't
that.
believe that. Given how involved Stanford is in the Caltrain business plan, I suspect folks are talking about it. Maybe they're not talking about it externally.
Okay, well, we'll take that as an action item, see what we can find out. Nadia?
So on that note, in my list of questions, I included, like, what are the legal requirements for the Stanford station? How did we get it? Who decided that we have it? How do we make it disappear if you want to? Is that Caltrain's? No, you'd be surprised. I actually tried to look up the history. I couldn't find very much on it. So if anyone
Did you
has
go
it
to
out there-
Cal?
No,
just kidding.
But I would like to hear from Caltrain, in the graphic that introduces the possibility of taking over Alma permanently for 2 lanes. Not that I'm thinking it's going to fly, but it goes back to this issue of, can you swing the right of way one way or the other and introduce a curve? And has Caltrain yet taken a position on that generally? Because I know it's something I've discussed with Boris at High Speed Rail about it, and I know that Sebastian's aware of it, but as far as I understand, Caltrain is still at the, what are my big plans in 2040, and hasn't really developed all the specs for what is possible at our level. And so going back to, like, how is this process working, I'm having a really hard time understanding how we're going to be able to even move forward with some of these things if Caltrain is still really behind in doing its homework.
Ed?
We are not proposing to swing the right-of-way here. I think the purpose of that exercise was to show that it really doesn't work because it destroys Alma.
Right, but in Meadow and Charleston, the videos that we have actually swings the right of way out to the west, to the east side. And so that was a question that we've asked before. It's like, it's introducing a new curve, and we haven't gotten a response from Caltrain.
One, I don't think we'll get one real time. Quite frankly, that's part of the work ahead. It would need to involve a negotiation with Caltrain on the right-of-way impact, should that be the option that the city of Palo Alto wants to pursue.
Caltrain going through a process? I guess that's what I'm asking them. Are you aware of them? Like, is there a Go team that's working on this kind of stuff, or? There's a bunch of ninjas hanging.
As a result of electrification and the business plan and all that stuff, Caltrain is looking at updating design standards, so that would kind of fall in that category, but that's, again, work in progress, so I don't know if they have an answer specifically.
Etty, did you want to add anything?
So our design for horizontal curvature does meet Caltrain's design criteria. So it is not a curvature, because Caltrain does have curvature within their tracks today, and this curvature that we've shown on these, as we've put these together. So when we don't meet their criteria, we try and point that out. And right now, the times we don't meet their criteria is really on the profile grade. But we are, on the horizontal curves that we've introduced into these designs, it does meet Caltrain design criteria for 110 mile per hour.
Well, let me also just reiterate that we'd be into a whole right-of-way air rights negotiation with Caltrain on how, whether it's moving horizontally or access under the existing Caltrain property, we would gain access. I'm sure we would be interested in using it for park use and the like. So clearly there will be property rights negotiations that would be necessary as a part of that type of option.
Okay, how many more want to speak? Because I know I've got a couple of public speakers. Yeah, Megan.
I had a quick question, which was, you explained that these could be 2 separate viaducts, the south one and the Churchill one. Could they be the same viaduct? And if so, why? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Yeah, kind of getting to the public comment earlier. I need you to turn your thing on.
Right, I mean, it's just money, basically, I think. You could extend the viaduct.
And again, count on me to try to just make sure that we're clear. The concept I think you're describing is a viaduct then that goes up to clear Churchill, stays up to clear Charleston and Meadow, and then comes back down. And as John's pointing out, the issue is the cost of the structure to maintain between Churchill and Mero.
Right, and
and
you've
also
got
the
the
station,
California
too.
Ave station,
And the
which you would
station.
have
Thank
an
you.
elevated
Yes.
station and.
Okay, Im Jung?
Is there any properties taken with this option?
Not with option one.
Option two? It's an
Option two, there's no property taken. You just restrict Alma to 2 lanes permanently.
Which might be mental property taken around here. All right, anybody else from the table before I go to the public? All righty. I know, Steve, you were on deck. Please just go ahead and line up and we'll move through since we are after 6, but I did want to make sure we have plenty of time to get questions in on this important work. Yeah, go ahead, Im Jung.
So, you know, the viaduct in option one is very close to the property line of the west side of Alma. Is that, is there any laws or anything to restrict that, you know, the distance?
No, I think that's, you know, that's in Caltrain right away. And, you know.
Yeah, they have to distance clear from the fence. What is it?
No, I mean, for this to work, it's going to eventually be.
We need your thingy on.
For this to work, because in this particular cross-section, it's showing a certain right-of-way for Caltrain. In Caltrain's right-of-way along this Churchill Viaduct changes. It goes from 85 feet to 70 feet, and it decks out again, so it's back and forth. What's constant is the distance between the northbound track or the farthest eastern track and the edge of Alma. That's always 38 feet. So the change is on the west side. But we do come very, very close to the west side.
Thank you.
Oh, a foot.
Okay, all righty. Yes, take it away.
So this question may already be out there, but back on when we were looking at the Embarcadero intersection.
We can get back to that Embarcadero intersection.
And
There we
the question I just have is, compared with the current configuration, looking at this new configuration, comparing it with the current configuration, what's the percentage increase in throughput particularly on Embarcadero going both directions? And I know that we can't answer that, and it may be that that's on the table, but helpful to understand it.
We'll try and get that for next meeting when Gary's here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then just, you know, I think that those of us in Southgate have a lot of empathy with our neighbors who are on Mariposa, back up to the tracks, and I think in a unique position, thinking about an elevated platform, and so if there, and particularly I think there's a potential, their concern is a potential impact on property values, and that is the savings that they have in their homes. And so the question is, in this kind of a scenario, how would there be consideration of them being compensated in some way if by objective means there was impact on their properties? Is there on their property values? Is there a mechanism for that?
So that would be something the city would probably have to look at. I mean, it isn't typical in a typical project, I guess is the answer. No. I mean, it isn't typical in other projects that I work on where the project itself would compensate a neighbor unless there was an actual taking. So if the city were to do something different, it would be on the city to do something like that.
Yeah, I think the point was if there was a material impact on property values, and maybe, ultimately that's a question of was there an impact or not based on the project. So I think that would be something that we'd have to take a look at.
Yes.
Yeah, this is just, there was a question early on this, and I don't think the answer was accurate. It was about going from Kingsley to High Street. To me, I see a left turn and right turn only off of Kingsley, and there was the answer that was said is you could go straight across to High Street, and at least both options show turn lanes, no straight across. So it's just, unless I'm wrong, I'm just.
All right, let's get Peter to clarify.
Yeah, this version, it does show a left and a right turn arrow only, but you could physically, I mean, that would be allowed. I mean, if you were trying to get to that neighborhood, you'd most likely just continue on Alma and make a right on Lincoln, for example. But yes, this variation shown here on the screen, you could continue across the intersection to High.
So maybe that could be clarified in future graphics.
Does that introduce more
prohibited.
signal phases?
Say again?
If you did that way, you could allow straight through. Does that introduce more signal phases?
Yeah, again, that'd be something that Gary would take a look at in terms of phasing of the intersection.
Level of service.
That took
Okay.
longer than I
Yeah.
expected, so, okay. If you could go back to the section slide that showed the viaduct, or it doesn't have to be the right there is fine. So,
Okay, please, that we got public people commenting. Let's be respectful.
so I just want to clarify my earlier comment about a one-track shoe fly. In the concept of, like, potentially, if one track of the permanent was done, like the left one, the right one for a while is the shoe fly, and then you have only one shoe fly. You only build one shoe fly, so you see 4 tracks. It's a sequencing. It may not work. There's a lot of reasons it might not work, but that I want to clarify. My question was around essentially you don't build a double shoe fly. You build one,
Right.
3 tracks, and then you
Right.
sequence one
Yep.
track up, then you move to that, and then you do the next track up, and you've only built one track. There's a construction constraints and stuff and viaduct.
We'll get you an answer right
So
now. John, thoughts?
Okay, on this retained fill, you probably could do that. You could build half of the retained fill, but when you get to the aerial guideway, that's where it's problematic. You'd have to build 2 separate guideways.
Well, 2 separate, so it's a trade-off of 2 separate versus the cost to build a whole track. You're building a whole track. So there's a viaduct cost, the Alma being closed cost. So there's a trade, it's like a cost thing that I think it cost benefit. That's my point. It doesn't, I'm not saying that's the right way or the wrong way. It's just this cost benefit trade-off to do. And the other thing I just think's from a viaduct and just in general, looking at some of these cities, I've been overseas where, like in Taiwan and Taipei, they have these viaduct things at times. You can have bike paths and jogging paths under them. It's like, it's a connectivity thing instead of a wall or instead of stuff. And it becomes this benefit. I'm not saying it trades off all the downsides for neighbors and stuff by any means, but it's just, there's some value there that's better than nothing. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm hoping I'm not going to pass out while standing up here because I'm actually one of those residents that lives on Mariposa with my back up to the track. So I have a couple questions. One on option 1, which I think is the one we're looking at, which I believe is the one that we're saying is the only possibility if we want to retain permanently more lanes on Alma. I have some questions. Is it so? This one in the video, it does go up on posts, and you're saying, and here it's retained fill. So is this what it ends up looking like in the area where it crosses Churchill? And then if it is, so I think for this group and also for the community to have the correct information to make decisions, I think we need dimensional drawings on, I see the 20-foot max. I think we need dimensions in all directions, including like if it is truly 1 foot behind my back fence, and then how high is that train up in the air, and people need to be able to see what the reality is going to be able to make accurate decisions. So that's a request. I don't know if you guys want to show anything here now if you have it. But then secondly, I wanted to ask, does this consider freight? Is this the type of structure that handles freight? Is there a freight train up there?
Yes.
All right, so just for the record, I would like those dimensional drawings to be
I think they
something
would
that
be
we-
available at the community meeting, right?
Yes, so we have full engineering drawings, and those are always available. That's how we develop these. We go from full engineering drawings, which are fully showing all the clearance, the heights and that, and then that's how these videos are developed. So it's based off engineered dimensions, and those will be available. We just for purposes of kind of getting the visual, we convert it into a video. That's a little bit easier to understand. To go to your question on the viaduct, this cross section that's shown up here, The viaduct itself has many, can be any type of structure. That's, I mean, this is only taking what a Caltrans concrete box structure. So as I think somebody has mentioned or brought up, that there's many different ways to show a viaduct and to do it, and this is just for illustrative purposes. We just picked, I mean, probably
Phil's
the
always
viaduct.
challenging us to make them prettier.
I guess
but
one more.
But just to be really clear, at the community meetings, there would be a way to have your address and be able to point to exactly what's going on behind your home.
Okay,
and
yeah,
that's why we
that
do the
actually was-
breakouts at the community
Okay, and
meetings.
that, one more request would be, I saw from the video, you show it from the Alma Street side, but I think you also need to show it from the other side. So what's it going to look like? What's the rest of the community going to see from all angles and vantage points?
So Eileen, remember those photos from Sacramento?
Yep, that we distributed.
Maybe they should go to some of the people here.
So they're on the website.
All right, okay.
They're not on the website?
No.
They shouldn't. They should be on the website.
Could we,
Maybe by the end of the week, they could be on the website.
on the
That's a
map
good point.
graphic that we have, so in the video, you can see where it transitions from retained fill to viaduct. I think it'd be useful on the map picture to be able to show which piece is retained fill, more or less, and then which part does it become a viaduct, and then which part does it go back to being a retained fill, so that the neighbors can then figure out where they are, and then kind of have a sense of what may or may not be behind their house, understanding that it's very early engineering.
I think one of
Right.
the issues is what is the power line structure going to look like above the rails? And that's what those pictures from Sacramento would give you a sense of.
So,
I'm not worried personally about the power lines. I'm worried about the actual train being right there.
Right, and the structure. Okay, Im Young and then Etty.
So when we did the South Palo Alto rendering, you guys show the CAP member requested what does it look like from their backyard, and you provide that drawing. So maybe we should add that.
perfect. That's what I was going to talk about. We've already done that for
Right,
Charleston Meadow,
right,
so we
yeah.
can do that here again.
But, and here in this, I think I concur Rachel's comment about the dimensions on the horizontal, because it looks like you draw 7 feet, and actually it's 1 feet from the fence to the 6 on the barrier. Okay, and, well, there is no room to do it, so I don't know why I could bury it, because I look at the map and then there is no room. There is 1 feet. And there is 1 feet, I think, but we can redo it. And also, that's a double-decker for 30 feet, is right? 30 feet high above the viaduct. It's drawn right now horizontal, 20 feet from the bottom, and then 30 feet high from max from the 20 feet. So it's a 50 feet, right? Total 50 feet height, and that accommodates a double-decker?
Accommodates the
Double-decker of
it
the...
accommodates the standard Caltrain train,
Right,
which is
right.
a double.
So I think what you're referring to as the double decker is really the power lines, the electrification lines.
Right, power
Yeah.
line above that is
Yeah.
30. So
Yeah.
in fact, it's a 50 foot above from the ground that I have to deal with 1 feet away from my backyard fence. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Tony.
So I really appreciate dimensions and how much can we modify this thing. And my concern is the width of this viaduct, because width and height determines how much light gets down onto the ground plane. The narrower we can get this, the better. And I don't know how we can start working with Caltrain to sort of custom these things so they fit Palo Alto.
Okay. All right, Imyan, back again.
So I know the South San Jose, when they do Caltrain work, the residents get compensated, and they install like triple windows and their blinds and refunds and all that thing happens. So perhaps we should ask Caltrain, related to the property value argument, what they can do in terms of noise and not having lights, maybe.
Microphone.
Okay, I repeat. So there is a compensation done by Caltrain in South San Jose regarding the noise, triple window, blinds, etc., for the residents next to the train track when they did the renovation. So maybe we should investigate what the Caltrain could do in this option. Maybe this is too early, but I don't know. Some point we should do it, and also the light not being coming to their backyard, you know, so how that gonna impact.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Judy?
This is a completely random question, but if you're driving on Alma and this configuration has been built, at the moment, there's landscaping. So now this gets within how many feet of actually the the southbound lane on Alma? What's
Alma gets left with about 28 feet.
28
During
feet?
construction.
During construction. So
After.
the landscaping gets removed.
Yeah.
And then during construction, when the temporary track is put in that position, then after the permanent track is built and traffic is back on the permanent track, the temporary track is removed and the landscaping
And you
is
go back in and put
replaced.
the
And
landscaping.
it's in the video, it going back in.
Right. Okay, good. Just want to
Yeah.
clarify.
Who controls the landscaping? Is that it is Caltrain, so we have to beg and plead, and if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it.
I think that would be a good negotiation of many that you'll be having with Caltrain if you move forward with something like this.
Well, and also just to be clear, part of the ongoing issue with Caltrain is the clearance they need from the tracks under current conditions, and tree and other landscaping removal they've done as a part of the electrification. Under this scenario, if the tracks are on an elevated structure, that will be less of an issue, or to be a different issue in terms of what their, I think, expectations would be on how landscaping is managed.
Or whether there be a trail available underneath, or any of the things that
All
we've
of the
heard from
above,
the
right.
community would be a negotiation.
Like under the BART tracks with the
Yeah,
built
yeah.
trails. So that made me think about parking, because this is going to be very attractive. We're going to want a lot more people taking the train. A lot more people will want to take the train, our own residents. And the question is, will the Caltrain do anything about additional parking in any shape? When this was asked a few years ago, they said, no, that's not our problem. So I'm just wondering if that's still their answer, because you know where they'll park in your neighborhoods.
I thought you were going to say they park under the track. No.
Yeah, that's what I thought she was going to.
If Caltrain created parking under the track, I mean, I would like to know what the answer is, since they're making it much more attractive for more people to ride the tracks.
I would say that the height of the train does not impact my desire to ride it. Like, I don't enjoy it more when I go through San Bruno than when I go through Palo Alto. So personally, as a Caltrain rider, like, being on an elevated structure doesn't mean I use it more.
No, it's just it's more people on more trains, longer trains.
So just reporting what I have heard from a presentation that once the board on October 5th has set a goal for a service vision about how many people they want to expect to be building up to, they're doing some access studies and will have an additional level of modeling and information about how they expect to support people getting to and from the train, which will be coming forward in the months between October and a bunch of months after October, and that is what I know from watching the presentation.
So what I'm going to do, since we have devolved into a conversation about the Caltrain business plan, which none of us are responsible for, is I will make sure that we highlight this. I know Jim will take this back, but also I'll make sure that we highlight it with their team to see if maybe there could be additional outreach to all of you, or to maybe some future opportunity for them to interact with us at this group, because some of these questions are questions that this team can answer. It is 6:30. I've held you over. I see a couple of you ready to go. So I just wanted to say our next meeting, as I've mentioned several times, is the 25th. Same bat time, same bat channel. We're in this room. And then on the 27th is the longer day. And have a great time at your college reunion. All right, we stand adjourned.